said, a lot of the artwork looked like it was made in Tiltbrush. So, Kayleigh, is Tiltbrush the main thing that you use when it comes to VR art, or do you use an assortment of programs? Kind of tell us about that. I don't know much about it. I've barely used it, so
Yeah.
kind of tell us how does it all work?
Well, I predominantly use Tiltbrush purely because that's kind of where I feel at home personally. But some people use several different programs. It depends what your intended like final result you want, what you want that to look like and what you're using it for. Tiltbrush has really worked for me, just because people have used it, and I've used it in so many different ways. It's quite versatile, and I think it's mostly the aesthetic that people are requiring with Tiltbrush, and that's kind of, it just always works out that it ends up being the right thing anyway. So even if somebody comes to me and they're like, oh, would you be able to use Quill or another one, we always kind of seem to come back around to Tiltbrush because it's just brilliant for that, for covering all bases, I suppose. And I mean, obviously, it just helps if you can export it in any sort of, if in the file that people want, it doesn't really matter. So I think on that side of things, Tiltbrush is just kind of, it's just so useful for so many different things that yeah, it's just worked for me so far. So my pipeline is just really just Tiltbrush, and then I literally export it. So I just spend all of my time in there. I create exactly what, especially because I can take all my pictures from inside Tiltbrush. I really don't have to leave the app at all. Especially for a whole commission, really. I'm just in there, and then once I finish, it's export, and that's it, really. So yeah.
That's incredible. It's incredible that you can just create these entire worlds pretty much out of Tiltbrush, out of this one program. And for
Yeah.
an artist, I imagine it's really exciting to not just be able to paint with your medium, but almost to feel like you're living inside of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's why it's so successful as well, is especially in Tiltbrush, is there's just sort of this magical, ethereal feeling to it, and it's not daunting. It's just, everything's quite instinctive in there. So yeah, definitely love the fact that I can experience my own artwork in that way, because I do come from a more traditional background when it comes to my artwork. I was always much more of a photorealist actually when I was
Oh,
younger.
well, that's quite a
Um,
shift.
yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's what was so good about it. I went to, especially when I first went when I went to university to study fine art. I wasn't really expecting to do any of this, to be honest, just because of I would always sort of end up in the same style every time that I drew. It would always be very intricate, detailed. I try and make things fairly realistic. So when I came across VR and started painting in Tiltbrush, and seeing the drastic difference from what it looked like compared to my work in real life, I didn't even worry about it too much. I was usually I didn't really prefer sort of abstract art in that way really before that. So it was really good for me to get out of my comfort zone as well. But it didn't really feel like out of my comfort zone. That's what's so odd about it, is that when in real life, and even now, I still draw the same as I always kind of have done. It's not really that, it's almost like when I go into VR and I paint in VR, it's like a completely different artistic ego in that sense, because it hasn't
Wow.
affected the way that I draw in real life, if that makes sense. You would kind of,
Wow.
I would assume it would have. Before, I thought, oh, maybe now when I draw, I'm going to be looser and more fluid and more colourful. But actually, no, I'm kind of like very separate in that, which
it's
is it's quite cool, yeah.
That's a great call because it's completely different. Basically, it
Yeah,
expanded your world, but it's kind of like if you're someone who likes to sketch and you go and sculpt something, it's not necessarily going to translate what you do. So VR is almost, it's this whole new thing where maybe I don't know, maybe sculptors feel differently about that. That's a great call out. What I
yeah.
should have asked, I realize now I should ask this first. We're going to backpedal just for a second. If someone came to you and said, "What is tilt brush?" I have no idea. I've never heard of it. How would you explain it to them?
I would explain it as a canvas, which is really a room. You paint in the space around you. So whereas in real life you would have a paper and it would be against a surface and you're leaning on it and you've got that whole hand-eye coordination that you're used to. Tiltbrush kind of throws all of that out the window. You've got no laws of gravity, like laws of physics. So it's just sort of limitless in that sense, that you are painting through the air virtually, and there is that 3-dimensional aspect to it. So it's almost like everything's suspended, really. There's no surface or rules, so you just kind of go with the flow. I mean, I've seen people that say that they're not artists most of the time, and then they go in VR and they're just captivated, and away they go. They're just like drawing all over. So yeah, it's just really like a canvas, but it's just the space around you. It is actually quite hard to explain. It's one of those where you have to be there to understand it, I suppose. But it's brilliant. It's honestly, you basically have a toolbox on your well, you can choose which hand you want it in, but you have a toolbox and a wide selection of brushes, and some of them are animated, so your work kind of can come to life quite easily. But it's quite instinctive and natural, so I feel like people usually take to it quite quickly.
Yeah, they do. I've put people in it who have some art skill, and they just, the minute they start, it's so intuitive. Like they just draw a line in the air, and there's always this like pause. They like stop and look at it like, wow, I can do
Yeah.
this. Like it's
Yeah, that's so true.
it's such an amazing experience because you just draw in the air. You don't have to. There's no difficulty of like, oh, I'm drawing on this or I'm sculpting this thing. It's just complete freedom. And not only that,
Yeah.
but there's abilities to scale it. So if you wanted, you can make this huge face really detailed, and then you can scale it down to a much smaller version, so it's a normal size, but all that detail work you put in is still there. Which
Yeah.
there's nothing like that in reality that we can do. That's like that. It's such an unusual experience. Every time I'm in it, I just wish I was more of an artist because I feel like I'm just squandering its potential, even playing or using it, because it's so amazing.
You insult it just by being in there,
I,
Jay.
I feel like that. I feel so bad. But you were talking about, so to me, I always thought Tiltbrush was an art program. You did art, but you're saying that you like export this and then you give it to people who don't even have VR. So like, this is something, can people 3D print this stuff? Can they, what happens to these files? I don't know any of this. So after you're done with them, what are these becoming afterwards, I guess?
Well, sometimes, so you can export the files in 3D print from if you take it into Unity and you can play around with it. So people have 3D printed from Tiltbrush, but most of the time I'm giving them the tilt file, unless they are taking it into Unity or some kind of similar game engine where they want to use it as the sort of skeletal basis of something, like using it as a mesh almost. So
Wow.
it really depends on where it's used for and that kind of thing. Like sometimes, well, I would say probably half of the time I'm not even really giving them the Tiltbrush file all, or even the model. I'll take a snapshot of the picture and that's enough for them. Or just the concept
Wow.
art. Some people just really like the aesthetic, and they like the fact that it looks 3D, but they like the fact that they know that it was made in an alternate reality. So it kind of, on a deeper level, some people just really they just like the way that it looks. So sometimes, obviously, we're raving about the VR. Virtual reality is amazing, being inside it, but some people don't have a headset or aren't in the industry are still they still like the way that it looks and they're interested in it. So yeah, sometimes I'm just selling this literally the snapshots of my work. So I get to experience it, but sometimes a lot of my clients don't even step foot in the work that I create, which I think is fascinating because it's almost like a whole other world that they don't get. I mean, I can offer it to them, but they can't do anything with it unless they've got a VR headset. So I think that's really interesting.
That really is, and I'm so curious so much about this. Like I said, I feel like we could talk about this forever. But something about VR and gaming, Adam, Adam, you know this. The gaming world still doesn't take VR super seriously. A lot of people hate on it. There's diehards like us who are in love with it. Does the art community think VR is a future? Do they take it seriously, or is it kind of in the same spot it is with gaming?
So personally, from the VR community, I mean, obviously the whole Tiltbrush community and everything, obviously we're dead serious about it. But yeah, I'm not sure I can't really speak for everyone else who isn't in VR. I think that a lot of people are trying, and I think it goes to show with the people that are asking for they're asking for my artwork, even though they don't have a headset. I think that's a good sign.
Yeah.
They're trying to get involved, and they'll ask me, oh, actually, how could I use? It's like sometimes they don't even have a project set up, but they'll be like, I love your work and I want to be able to use it. I want to use VR now, and I think that's really cool. But I think, yeah, there is some like, I think it can be a little bit intimidating, and people kind of forgetting the whole point of art and how like broad the spectrum of art is. So personally, I had a bit of a struggle at university trying to open people up to what I was doing, and the idea that I was creating work in a completely different way. Like it is unorthodox, and I completely understood my the problem some people had with accepting it or figuring out where that was going to fit on the course, and especially being the only person, especially if you're on a course like I was, where you're the only person that's interested in that, and then suddenly the university's like, oh, we don't have the resources for you, but then I was so passionate about it, so I think that was a bit of a struggle for them. Especially because I came across it so randomly, and then was suddenly decided this is me for the rest of my life. I have to do VR. So I was pretty adamant that that's all I wasn't budging at all. So I personally have experienced people who it's almost like they could sort of hit a brick wall with it sometimes, and you really have to like find a different way of like making them understand, especially in that sort of like that university setting where I'm going there to obviously study something, and then I choose what I want to study, and they're like, no. So
Yeah.
that was pretty hard. Yeah. So but I think people are trying, and I've already seen that the same university that I went to is now taking more steps to involve VR into the art practice. So hopefully if I went back there and I had a look, maybe they would have their own sort of permanent residential headset. That would be nice. I'd have to try not to be a bit bitter about it, because when I was there, I really, really struggled and had to like beg and beg. But luckily, Tiltbrush, actually, the hand of Patrick Hackett came into my life and sorted that whole thing out. So that was really nice, actually. That was actually really cute to mention, actually, that the VR community basically saved my degree.
Wow.
Because I was struggling so much when it came to my third year, sorting out a degree show, which is basically at the end of your usually on an art course, you have this show where you'll show your final piece, and you'll have an audience, like all your friends and family will come to the show, and it's a public event. And I really needed a headset for it, and the uni had an issue with the security of keeping the headset there overnight, which I completely understand. This one that I was borrowing from one of the tutors, and the security of the PC. So we had to attach the PC to the flooring of this the level, the fine art level. But yeah, there was a bit of a mishap with being able to get a headset. So I kind of went straight to Twitter in a panic and was like, oh no, in capital letters. I think it will still be on there somewhere, like really embarrassingly. Me sort of panicking, saying, oh no, I haven't got a headset for my whole final piece is in VR. So I have nothing to show, it's virtual. It doesn't really exist without a headset. Can anyone like lend me one? And I had so many responses. I was so overwhelmed, but it was so nice. Everyone was just like doing their bit, and like I got so many messages from all over the world. It was so nice.
That's
and
incredible.
It was that's when you really know, like, oh wow, these people are amazing. Like they love VR so much that they see this student who's really like trying to show their university what VR can do, and then kind of being let down. So that was super nice. So eventually, when Patrick Hackett from Tiltbrush, when he saw that, he was nice enough to send me a headset instantly. So he literally, without that happening, I would have really struggled. I don't even know, I probably wouldn't have even been able to exhibit my work. So which actually, like, it goes towards your grade. So
wow.
Yeah, it was amazing.
That's such an amazing story, and I think VR has a power that we don't always realize, because that was kind of the same thing when I first got into VR. I was like, this is it. Like, this is like this is the thing I care about and I want to be involved in.
Yeah.
Adam, what do you have some questions for Kayleigh? What have we not answered here that you think the listeners might be curious about?
Yeah, so this is one question that I've kind of been thinking about. I know that you really prefer Tiltbrush, and you mentioned a couple of other programs. Someone who's looking to get into this, they try out Tiltbrush, and maybe it's not for me. What other programs can you recommend to sort of get the same artistic expression in VR?
Yeah, well, I think it really comes down to what type of artist that person is. So I think if you are more of an illustrator, but Tiltbrush is a bit maybe too over the top with the neon lights and the animated brushes, and maybe just the overall aesthetic isn't for you, I think Quill is probably from my experience. I really like Quill actually. I think for any kind of illustrative work, I think Quill works really well, and I know they have some really, really cool tools that Tiltbrush doesn't provide, and that nice gradient effect and that kind of thing. So I definitely would recommend Quill for the illustrator. But then if you're more of a sculptor, I can understand that those two might not give you that sort of versatility that you need when you're sculpting. So I think sort of Masterpiece VR or Medium is probably better for Gravity Sketch, is better for that sort of thing. I actually I tried out a new one called Argil sculpting, and it's a bit like Masterpiece and Medium, but that was quite cool actually. I think that's a new one, and personally I'm not a sculptor, so I think I was even though it looks like I create sculptures, my sort of the motion that I'm doing is really illustrating, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
So I think it really depends on how you see yourself and how you physically work. Especially in VR, it is different as well. So I kind of put myself in that illustrator box. But yeah, I think for anyone sculpting that maybe hasn't really found what they want, maybe Argil. I just got messaged by them on Instagram and they seem really cool, and that was I thought it was nice, even though I'm not a sculptor. I think a sculptor would have a good time in there, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a different way of working. So
But it sounds
There's
like there's an incredible breadth of programs to be able to do
yeah.
this. This
oh
is like
yeah,
an entire
definitely.
world that I didn't even know existed.
Yeah, there's a lot of choice, to be honest. And they're all on, like, all these communities are on Discord and that kind of thing, and they're really nice to talk to, and they'll take on loads of feedback. They're always like welcoming feedback all the time and trying to make things better for artists. So I think that's really cool.
That is awesome. There's so many you mentioned there I didn't even know about. Just for the listeners, I think is it Quill or Medium? Is one of them an Oculus exclusive? Do you know?
Yeah, Oculus is Quill. Quill
Okay.
is on Oculus, yeah.
So yeah, keep in mind if you're on Oculus, that's great. If not, you may want to look at some of the other programs. If you're out there and you're on PSVR and you're hearing about this, you're like, oh, this is so cool. I don't think any of these main ones are, but there is Sculpt VR on PSVR. There's a Harmonix one where you can play music and your art dances to the beat of the music.
Wow.
Yeah, that was actually the first one I ever used. I used it for playing Pictionary with friends one night. The artist for the Pictionary would put the headset on and draw in VR, and we would see it on the TV and have to guess
Mhm.
what they were drawing. So yeah, there's a whole huge breadth of programs out there that you can check out. No matter what headset you're on, if you're interested in this, try it because it's such a different side of VR than the gaming that it's just so amazing. And if you have any art skill, you're gonna feel a lot cooler than I do when I try to play them. And I draw a stick figure. I'm like, oh my gosh, look at this stick figure. Uh, I think the last thing that I was kind of curious from about with you. So as a kid, we had this stupid movie maker program that my brother and I would play with, and it was just this thing way back in the day. But one thing that I noticed a lot of times was when you're doing something from 2D, like you might put a mustache on someone's face, but it's out here and you don't know that because you're only looking at one camera angle. Is there challenges when you go into a 3D environment and you like have to make sure that from different angles this thing is gonna look right? Kayleigh, did we lose you?
Oh, sorry, yeah, I
No.
couldn't hear you then.
Oh, uh-oh. Well, I was just saying basically like when I played with this program as a kid before, I would be like setting an object where I thought it was like connected to a character's face or
Oh,
something,
right, yeah,
and it
that's right.
wouldn't be when I looked from another angle. So is there challenges that VR presents that like flat art wouldn't normally have?
Yeah, definitely. That is the number one thing to get that you come across when you first try these sort of artistic applications. So yeah, it's definitely something to get used to. So exactly how you just said it, it's almost like the depth of perception is something that you do have to get used to. I noticed that when I first started painting in Tiltbrush, I would always sort of get that wrong, especially if I was trying to paint something that was all on one level or one surface in front of me. I would always sort of lean too far one way at one moment. So and then when I would look to the side, like you say, everything would be almost like it would just like spread out and separated and isolated. I noticed that over time, your brain was just your sort of hand-eye coordination just must adapt, because I just never have that issue anymore. And I was actually thinking about this the other day, because I did remember that I used to have that problem all the time, that if I would try and paint something sort of all on one level, like sort of in a line usually, where it really matters that when you've got sort of like, especially in Tiltbrush, when you try and paint something that is flat, if you're not against, there is a guide that you can import, so it feels like in VR you're leaning against it. That really helps.
Oh.
But before that was a thing, because I used to use Tiltbrush before these tools existed. Yeah, I would always struggle with that. But I noticed over time now that I've used it for so long, I just never have that issue. So it must be that my hand-eye coordination's got used to the distance, or I know to keep my hand at the same level with how my arm's stretched out. And I think that's really fascinating. I've literally, my body's adapted, because I've noticed from that as well, it must be why I get a back pain because I think you're tense for so long, especially if it's a big piece and you don't take as many breaks as you should do, like I don't. So I'm sort of in the same position for so long. I think it must just be something that you end up picking up. It's completely normal to really struggle at the beginning. So anyone thinking like I'm never going to get used to this, like you 100% do. And there are guides and things that you can put in place to make that a lot easier.
That's super encouraging to me. Adam, did you have any other curiosities here as we're wrapping up?
I think that should do it for us today. I thought it was just insanely fascinating to hear about all the intricacies in the art world with VR. I mean, it's something that I don't have a whole lot of experience with, and it's really interesting hearing an expert in the medium be able to come and chat with us about it.
Oh, thank you.
Speaking of experts in the medium, Kayleigh, thank you so much for coming on tonight. If our listeners are like, where do I find this girl? Where do I look at her artwork? What do I do? How do they find you? Tell us all about that.
So I'm kind of on everything. So my main one is my YouTube. I think to really see my work in all of its glory is probably my YouTube. So I'm Kayleigh Eliza on YouTube. That's where I upload all I combine my VR art with my covers, and I've made a playlist. So if I made any work for someone else, I'll put it in that VR playlist. And then there's a music playlist. So even if I can't upload it, obviously, because it's not my work anymore, once I've handed it over, I'll put it in that playlist. And then I'm also on Instagram under Kayleigh Eliza VR. So it's actually at Kayleigh_Eliza_VR. And that's basically, I use that as my portfolio. So everything that I'm allowed to post, like anything that I've made in VR will go up there. And then I'm also on Twitter, just under Kayleigh Eliza. And I just kind of share all of that same stuff. And on Twitter, I'll share a bit more, probably more like behind the scenes stuff. So if you like seeing half-made environments, I sometimes post them on Twitter if I'm feeling confident. But yeah, they're the main ones, really. Yeah.
Well,
Awesome.
Everyone, you should 100% go check out Kayleigh on every platform she is found.
Thank you so much.
So if you've enjoyed interacting with us, enjoyed listening and watching us on this podcast, come and visit us on Discord. We have an active community there, and you can submit QA questions for us to answer on the show, and you can influence us in some way in which games we play and what we talk about each podcast. Chat about all things VR. You can become a patron and help support the production of this show. And if you're listening to the podcast, check us out on YouTube. And if you're watching us on YouTube, we have plenty of audio options for you to check out as well. Thank you so much for listening. And remember that when it comes to VR, you have to dive on in.